Oh, you can't hear me? Thanks for telling me, Liquid Acids. Sorry about that. That's really awkward. So what I was saying was, we did a 24-hour stream yesterday, and of course by default the day before, seeing as it was 24 hours. And normally I was going to do an archive stream at the end of that 24 hours, but I was completely tired, so I kind of had to move it. That's why I moved it to today. Now, normally I also announce the title of the story that I'm going to be reading, but today I have a story that I wrote not too long ago that doesn't yet have a title, so, you know, it's gonna be a little different. But then, all of this is kind of different because I don't normally stream on Mondays, so, it's just a special stream on top of a special stream, or after a special stream. It'll be fine. Anyway, so, music is from tabletopaudio.com, kind of to set the tone for the story, and I hope it does not interfere with your viewing/listening pleasure. So without further ado, Alinus Varan was a man whose profession changed about as often as the wind changes its direction. But the one thing that was always constant was his ability to get in trouble. Usually not through his own design, but rather through the misinterpretation of what he said by others. One such instance took place in the Writhing Barmaid Inn, where he had the misfortune of running into a particularly aggressive dwarf named Bran Gravelhammer. The dwarf in question had been poor and unable to drink for a fortnight, leaving him with a temper one would normally only see in wartime. Alinus, being a student of the Order of the Silver Loon, had funds where he needed them, and knowledge to replenish them should they run out. Often performing menial tasks for the people of Cordomar, such as conjuring water over a burning house, or levitating goods into a warehouse. He most enjoyed spending these funds on drinks and elven foods, preferring to consume them away from prying eyes. With his back to a wall and safe from those who lurk in the shadows. Unfortunately for Alinus, he was met with this Bran character on his way back to his table with a big mug of ale. Bran's eyes widened, and for a second seemed almost bleeding, but quickly turned angry as Alinus tried to move past him. "Hold on a second," he grunted. "Yes?" asked Alinus politely. "Spare a drink for a dwarf in need," Bran suggested. "I'm sorry, friend, I have no coin to spare," Alinus commented. "I don't want your stinking coin, mage. I asked for a drink," Bran snorted. Alinus pondered a long while, keeping a close eye on Bran for any signs of possible attack, but when he saw none, he boldly shook his head, apologized for the dwarf's inconvenience, and took a sip from his mug. Bran, being this close to ale, turned a violent red and charged blindly at Alinus. Never the wisest decision, as the mage simply threw him with an amused look and promptly blasted a puff of air at him, sending him crashing into an adjacent table. Bran got even angrier. And because of this humiliation, grabbed the dagger from his belt and charged again. This time, though, he was met with a patch of ice on the inn's floor which sent him sliding headlong into the table Alinus sat at. When Bran finally regained consciousness, Alinus smiled at him, asked him kindly to calm down, and bade him to take a seat. Bran, not being the sort of dwarf to make the same mistake twice, well, thrice, sat opposite Alinus and bowed his head in shame before asking the mage what he wanted. Alina simply smiled and told Bran he wanted nothing from him. Bran couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. First he flaunted his ale in a desperate dwarf's face, then he humiliated him, and now he believed that offering a seat would make it better? Clearly this fool had never dealt with dwarves. And if he had, he'd been fortunate enough to run into those who had a steady flow of coin, unlike most of the population in the city of Blightward. "So you expect me to sit here and watch you drink ale?" Bran snapped. "No, friend. I expect you to sit here until the gods arrive," Alina stated calmly. Bran looked at Alina, puzzled. "You're kidding me, right?" Alina shook his head and took another deep sip from his cup. Bran nodded and smiled at Alinus, then sucker-punched him as hard and fast as he could, sending the mage's face into the inn's wall. For a second, it seemed like Bran had won. And this music is getting really loud. Sorry about that. For a second it seemed like Bran had won, and he moved the mage's ale closer to himself. But the sound of someone clearing their throat made him look up to see the two heavily armed guards ready to take him away. He would have fought them both without too much hesitation had it not been for the mage's ability to take a punch and stay conscious. But seeing the mage stroking his face and beard with a slight smile made him think the better of it. He simply offered the guards his hands while hanging his head in shame. It was just going to be one of those days. Alinus, in the meantime, had had quite enough of ale and brawling for one evening, so he paid the innkeeper, thanked him kindly for the food and ale, then made his way to the White Spire, the main establishment for the Order of the Silver Loom. A few students of the arcane there seemed to have half a mind to ask him what had happened, but when met with his stern expression, took to their tomes and scrolls instead. Even then he could imagine the questions tumbling around in their young minds. "Are you all right, sir? Can we help you? Who did this to you?" All folly and unimportant. The only important question was why he was still in Blightward instead of going out to Iveriad, the elven city in the Glimmer Wood in the north, where the High Elves were said to delve into deeper secrets of the arcane arts. It was the only place that still made sense to him in an otherwise unchanging world, which seemed too stubborn to break the status quo. The only reason he hadn't yet ventured out was due to his obligation to his student, Atros, a young man with a seemingly unending potential for great magic, whom he pledged to teach the ways of magic and the values of the Order of the Silver Loom. Even Atros, whose questions were usually a statement to his great intellect, was but a distant thought to Alinus, almost a burden at that moment when his tired body hit the mattress of his bed and his head sought the comforting embrace of a pillow. He wished for sleep, but his mind raced with the day's events. This dwarf who hid him, a symbol for what was going on beneath the surface pleasantries of Blightward. The once great human capital of Strixvalen, a kingdom to the humans, now a piece of fruit ridden with maggots and oozing with despair thanks to the unchallenged king, Ynorin Hawklight. Ynorin Hawklight, son of Lennox Hawklight, was a warrior employed by the Watch, the kingdom's guild of warriors tasked with the protection of the realm, when an orc raid setting buildings ablaze, leaving a streak of corpses in Haunstead, arrived. Ynorin and his brethren went to that town of Haunstead to deal with the threat, armed with little to no knowledge of what they were facing. Upon arrival, they found an orc band of mercenaries under the banner of Ogle Grimclaw, an orc war chief, hacking their way methodically through the town's guards, or, well, what was left of them. It seemed an easy challenge until two men of the watch fell to the orcish blades, and two more met their end by the brutal impact of the war chief's fists. It was left to Ynorin and Helen of the watch, then, to end the threat. One of the orc mercenaries confidently brought his blade down on Helen, but found that he was nimble enough to duck out of the way and subsequently sink his blade deep into the orc's chest. The orc's brother, in a fit of rage, charged at Helen, hoping to strike him down before he withdrew his blade, but found the tip of a swiftly thrown dagger bury itself in his throat before he ever reached Helen. Ogle then sent his remaining two mercenaries at Ynorin, hoping to take out the seemingly weaker soldier, but Helen charged in and took one of them down with a well-timed kick in the side and a quick stab of his sword. Unfortunately, Helen miscalculated the angle of his attack and left his side exposed to the goring longsword of the other mercenary. Ynorin grabbed Helen as he slumped down, but was forced to drop him as the orc swiped his sword at Ynorin next. Word scrolls. He only just managed to parry the orc's blow, and he was certain he would fall before too long, when out of the corner of his eye he noticed the war chief bearing down on a young woman attempting to run in her long gown, but slipping and falling in the muddy streets. Ynorin felt the hot rush of anger and frustration go through him as he redirected the mercenary's blow to strike the wall of a nearby building, and subsequently opened the orc's throat at the cost of yet more energy. Ynorin's tired body complained, groaned with each step he took, but he took the dagger from his belt with a sigh, ran at the war chief and tossed it as he slid past the orc's boots. Then, as the creature slipped and turned slightly because of the pain, Ynorin sat there, braced against the wall of the woman's house with his sword, and shoved it up through the orc's side and into its blackened heart. That day, he earned the title of hero, and was chosen to lead the realm as per tradition. But whenever a new hero was set on his path to greatness, Ynorin's hired blades ended their ascent, ensuring Ynorin's reign and their supply of coin. This slow but steady destruction of the kingdom's potential for greatness pushed it into the abyss, and on its path to become the cesspit Alina saw it as. This series of thoughts and memories flowed through Alina's head for most nights, providing him with little rest and a great amount of worry as for what the next day might bring. He awoke that next morning, not only with the thought that he had inadvertently created a monster in the dwarf he'd met the previous day, but also the sight of the huge smile and excited expression of his pupil. "Morning, master," Atros mused. "For the last time, Atros. I am your instructor, not your master," Alina sighed. Atros laughed for a minute, then took out a tome and said, "Sir, I found a way to complete this ritual." Alinus pushed himself up just in time for the tome to land painfully on his legs, then opened it up and read through the contents. What he saw there surprised him greatly. They were a short list of ingredients followed by a long list of complicated and precisely timed verbal components to make one immune to magic effects meant to affect one through their heritage. He had to read it a second time to make sure, but eventually Alinus looked up at his pupil with great surprise. "I know," Atros stated. "You don't believe me." Alinus took a breath to answer, but was interrupted. "But sir, if you cast a spell to bring my father's corruption into light, you'll see." Alinus shook his head. "Your father's corruption?" "Yes," Atros confirmed. "My father was as I am, but he fell to his inner darkness." "I see," Alina said. "Are you sure?" Atros nodded and closed his eyes, to which Alinus began casting the spell. The next minute seemed like an eternity, as the room filled with the weight of the past and the walls looked somehow paler. But when the spell was completed and the room itself returned to normal, it was apparent immediately that Atros had been unaffected through it all. Atros' eyes opened, and at the same time, the smile that before rested on his face became even bigger, if that was possible, but not malicious, as Alinus had expected it to turn. It was then that Alinus realized he might be rid of his pupil much sooner than expected, as he had just completed a ritual that Alinus himself had once studied but never been able to complete. Not for the lack of materials or concentration, but for the lack of precision in his timing, no matter how many times he attempted it. He had known that it was something within the arcane energies permeating all living things that had to allow the caster to feel his way through the timing, and thus the entire ritual, revealing nothing but great power. Alinus would test his pupil over the following week, making sure that his suspicions were indeed true, before heading out to Iveriad to learn what the elves had, paying a visit to his friend Rothiel Althenas, a high elf scholar and enthusiastic traveler he had met during an intervention by the Order of the Silver Loom in a matter known only as the Arcane Disaster, where the gnomish magi had opened up a portal into an unexplored realm where all sorts of horrors lived and poured into Cordamar. During that particular event, it was Rothiel who had cast the fireball which sent several of the emerging creatures back through the portal, giving Alinus the time he needed to close it, and the other magi the time to take care of the remaining creatures. However, Alinus had no idea if Rothiel would even be there. It was his own fault, mostly, for not writing to him, though he wasn't sure if he had, he would have received any reply. As elves, high elves especially, weren't known to keep close relationships, much less communications with mere humans, and Rothiel was a border case, at best, when it came to elfish traditions. So, naturally, Alinus came to the conclusion that the only option was to scry for his friend, in order to ascertain his location. He prepared a pendulum, map, and the elfish necklace he had received for his help, and found his friend in the Iveriad, just where he hoped he'd be. Thus he grabbed his belongings, packed them away in a backpack, and stowed some rations for the road as well. Then he said his farewells, and was about to leave for the Glimmerwood when he remembered the dwarf. Alinus took a deep breath, shook his head, and scolded himself for always needing to know. Then he made his way to the prison. Once there, he found out that the dwarf was being released and was gathering his belongings at the guard post still inside the prison walls. Alinus was about to head there when Bran emerged.
"Oh, for the love of gods! What now?"
Bran sighed. "I wish to apologize for the way things went, and to make sure you're all right," Atros said.
"I haven't been all right since I was outdone by another dwarf blacksmith,"
Bran spat. "You know how to forge weapons and armor?" Atros asked, surprised.
"Aye, that I do. And I know how to use 'em too," Bran said proudly.
"Impressive. How would you like to get paid again?" Atros prompted.
"I'm listening,"
Bran said. Then he told the dwarf about his plans to travel to Iveriad, and how the road there was known to be dangerous, to the point where he might need a companion. Bran, being at the lowest point he could have possibly been in his life, thought for a long moment spat some obscured insults about elves in Dwarvish, then swallowed his pride and agreed to accompany him on the voyage on one condition. There would have to be payment in ale, up front, at the first town along the way. With a hearty laugh, he agreed to the dwarf's terms, glad for the strong arm and interesting company on the way. Bran, on the other hand, was just happy to leave the capital behind for a while. The longer, the better. First stop was Hansted, and as per the agreement, they went into the Blue Bell Tavern. The door opened to a pleasant scent of venison and wine, and the even more pleasant sight of several young ladies having a drink. The barkeep no doubt in some way responsible for this turnout, as his muscular chest and arms remained bare underneath an apron stained with blood, sauce, and knife marks. He was young, strong, and had a deep voice, all qualities the women of Hansted seemed to adore, but remained irrelevant to Alinus and Bran, whom were more impressed by his ability to pour out a good ale for a fair price. In fact, in Bran's eyes, this man was a rare type of human he could come to like. But when the ale was gone, so was he, along with Alinus, to ride for another 6 hours and make camp near Faradun Forest, where it was said the hunting was good and the predators scarce. Though all that was hearsay, all of that remained to be seen. Neither of them were about to just take anyone's word for it, especially when it came to possible dangers out in the wild. And that was all of it. I know it's a pretty short story, and it's not entirely finished either, but, you know, it gives you some idea as to how Blightwood and the surrounding area used to be before the times that you see in our weekly D&D game. Also shows that, you know, Atros, who the party discovered to be a dragon, was pretty good at hiding his true identity. Thanks, Ace Ram. I'm happy you enjoyed it, man. I'm not quite sure what the next story is going to be, but I will probably announce what the story will be about before the next archive. Perhaps at some point I'll even make a list of archive stories so that people can select by title what the archive story is going to be, but that will depend on how many followers I'm able to accumulate over the coming streams. You know, if they come in fast, I'm gonna have to come up with stories faster. If they come in slow, then, you know, I have some time. Also, there is one change that you guys might not have immediately noticed, but we changed the channel's currency from loot to minions, as minions made more sense with the whole Warlock theme. Warlock team? Well, maybe some wonderful day we will have a team of Warlocks, but for now, all we have is our academy. And within our academy, all of you wonderful acolytes. So, if you want to know more about that, type !currency. Or, if you want to check how many minions you've already accumulated, type !minions. Don't worry, if you have followed some time ago, you still have the same amount of points, quote unquote. You know, your currency has been fully transferred, but you know, it's just, it has a different name. All for the sake of making a clear brand. As I am the weird warlock of Twitch, I feel like any acolytes should have theme appropriate points. Yes, all your minions. 3,013 of them. You're beginning to become a formidable warlock. That's awesome. Also, pretty soon I'm probably gonna start up a t-shirt campaign. When I say pretty soon, I'm talking months though, but, you know, kind of trying to take things to a next level. The first t-shirt will probably say "Stay Weird" on the front with the logo, and if you don't know what the logo is, this is the one. I'll make it kind of appear next to my face rather than on my face. Pre or post holiday season for the t-shirt campaign? Probably pre-holiday season. I'm thinking I'll start it mid-October. Or actually, if I hit end of October, I don't know. I might do it for Halloween. I might do it in the weeks before Christmas and New Year. It'll depend on some funds that I am awaiting. So keep an eye out for that. I will make sure that it is posted in the channel once it's launched, and that you guys have a little notice beforehand as well. Because I need to make the design and make sure that all the appropriate logos are on there, that there's a URL to the channel on there as well, so don't worry, you will be notified on time. You'll get a little sneak peek at the design as well once that is finished, so it's gonna be good. In the meantime, I